The film takes place during World War II when some military planes are getting ready for a bombing raid. Phil is flying one of those planes, and as soon as he sees the target, he gives the green signal to the bombarder, Lou, who gets ready for the drop. While he waits for the target to get in enemy range, they start receiving some enemy fire, and some planes even go down. But even through all of the chaos, Lou drops the payload right on the target to get applause from the crew. However, they have a problem. The doors to the payload chamber are not closing, and they're getting surrounded by enemy fighter jets. Lou tries to close the doors, but almost gets shot. He notices that one of his friends got hit, so he tries to help him, but just then another guy gets shot. While Lou tries to treat him, the rest of the crew wipes out the enemy jets. They're all okay for now, but Phil and his co-pilot Hugh warn Lou that they won't be able to land because the plane is damaged. While waiting for their fate, Lou thinks about his childhood. He was a mischievous boy who didn't pay attention in church. He was more interested in smoking and drinking, and one day some kids tried to bully him. A policeman intervenes and took Lou home, where he told his family that Lou was drinking. That didn't sit well with his dad, who beat him up that night. A few days later, Lou again was drinking, while watching his brother Pete run. When someone noticed him, he took off running, and this is when Pete realized how fast Lou was. So he pushed Lou to prepare so that he could run for the school team. Lou didn't believe in himself, so Pete explained to him that if you don't give up, no one can beat you. These words changed Lou's life, and he got picked for the school team. He kept running all the way through high school, where he made a name for himself by winning races. His family and a lot of fangirls supported him, and during one of these races, he broke the record for the fastest high school runner in the USA. This is how he got picked for the Berlin Olympics, and as he was leaving, Pete told him to have fun and never stop fighting. Lou is thinking about all this as the plane gets closer to the runway. As expected, the landing is horrible and they crash, but they survive when the rock wall stops their plane before it could fall into the ocean. They celebrate this victory, but the celebrations end soon when they see the bodies of their fallen comrades. Back on the base, Lou still likes to run, and Hugh follows him to keep his morale up. After a great run, Lou is celebrating his current time, when Phil comes there with some soldiers and tells him to get ready for a rescue mission. This time, they're looking for some pilots who are stranded in the ocean. Hugh is worried that they're flying a very old plane, and his fears become a reality when the plane loses 2 engines in a matter of seconds. Phil orders everyone to get ready for a crash landing, and at that moment of fear, Lou remembers his time in the Berlin Olympics. He wasn't really the favorite in that event. Still, his families and town members were listening intently when he took part in the 4,000-meter race. In the beginning, he failed to keep pace with other runners, but in the last lap, he gave it everything he had and set record for the fastest final lap, which made his parents really proud. Lou is lost in that moment of glory when the plane hits the water. He survives the crash, but his legs get stuck under a machine gun, and he's losing consciousness underwater. He's at death's door when the gun moves due to the water pressure, and he immediately swims towards the top. He finds out that only Phil and a guy named Max survived the crash. Phil is injured, so they get him on the raft. At this point, Mac is freaking out, but Lou tells him to stay calm and make sure to save their rations. During their first night, some sharks rock their raft, and they're still around in the morning. This is when Lou notices a plane in the sky. He and Mac use dyes and flares to get its attention, but the plane just flies away. Lou is disappointed, but he's furious when he learns that Mac ate everything in one night. With no food, they start losing hope as they get sunburned. Then one morning, a bird lands on the raft. Unfortunately, the meat makes them vomit. Phil decides to use it as bait to catch some fish, and manages to get one. They enjoy eating raw fish while Lou tells them how his mom makes some great Italian food. As more days go by, their situation starts getting worse because of dehydration. One night, while looking at the stars, Lou wonders if God made them. He asks Phil about it, who not only believes in God, but also assures Lou that God saved him in that crash for a reason. And when they get into a storm a few days later, Lou prays to God to save his life, and his wish seems to come true because they survive the storm and even get some much-needed water from the rain. This boost allows them to catch a shark, which provides them with a lot of food. Then, on their 28th day in the ocean, they spot another plane. They again fire flares to get its attention, and to their surprise, the plane turns around, but their happiness turns into fear when they realize that it's a Japanese fighter jet. They jump into the water to dodge the bullets coming their way, but they're surrounded by sharks. Lou has to dive twice into the shark-infested water, but by some miracle, all of them make it out alive. Their raft, however, is sinking, and when Lou tries to repair it, a shark attacks him. This is when Max saves his life by beating down the giant fish. This scary encounter brings a smile to their faces as they patch up their raft. However, a few days later, they are barely alive. Mac especially is at his limit, and he asks Lou if he'll die soon. Lou tells him that maybe he will, and he's correct, because Mac passes away that evening, and his friends give him a sailor's burial. A day later, they wake up to see a Japanese ship in front of them. They are taken prisoner, and Lou is put in a cramped, dirty cell where he can hear Phil getting tortured. Still, at least he has some food and he's alive. Then on a rainy day, he's taken in front of the commanding officer, who knows that Lou is an Olympic runner. He tells Lou to give up the location of his camp if he wants to live. Lou gives him some fake information and tells Phil to do the same. As time goes on, Lou starts losing his mind in the cramped cell, when one day guards try to take him out and he attacks them. They beat him up and take him to an opening, where he and Phil are ordered to strip and kneel. Lou thinks that they're getting executed, and he's unable to control his tears, but fortunately, the Japanese soldiers are just giving them a bath. After this, they're blindfolded and transported along dozens of prisoners on a ship. After getting off the ship, Lou and Phil are separated by the Japanese men and put into trucks. As he's getting driven, Lou tells a fellow prisoner about how he was supposed to visit Tokyo for the Olympics. But instead of a hero's welcome, he's taken to a prisoner camp, where the camp commander Watanabe makes it clear that he will be rough with them. He notices Lou staring at him, and he doesn't like it. To express his anger, he beats Lou up so bad that his nose breaks. The prisoners are then forced to stand all day before they can finally get to their barracks. In there, Lou meets an officer named John, who tells him to not piss off Watanabe since he's unhinged. But luck isn't on Lou's side. As winter rolls around, the prisoners are forced to exercise in the cold. During one session, Watanabe asks who the Olympic runner is among them. After Lou raises his hand, Watanabe asks him to run against a Japanese soldier. It becomes clear that it isn't a fair match, because Lou is in really bad shape and he ends up falling down. Watanabe doesn't take pity on him, however, and he hits him with a stick just to express his disappointment. That night, Lou notices that John is sharing notes with prisoners. He's spreading the news about the war, and apparently the US is winning. John gets all this information by listening to Japanese soldiers while he does his chores, like cleaning toilets. Lou finds out that after cleaning, they have to take the waste to the shore to dump it in the ocean. One morning, Watanabe enters their living quarters with his soldiers to search them thoroughly. He finds John's notes under the prisoner's bed, and he beats the life out of the guy to punish him. Lou hates his guts and wants to strangle him, but John tells him that the only way he wins is if he survives the war. Lou listens to this advice, and he's given some hope after seeing Allied bombers near their camp. However, his patience gets tested when out of nowhere, Watanabe wakes him up at night and starts hitting him with his belt. The next day, Lou is told that in America, people are thinking that he died. People from Tokyo radio station want to give him a chance and tell the world that he's still alive. Watanabe is hesitant to let Lou go, but gives him permission in the end. So Lou travels to Tokyo. He is taken to the Tokyo radio station where he becomes a part of the famous radio broadcast. This is when he tells his family that he's alive and he's in good health. He wishes them Merry Christmas and says he'll see them soon. The news of his survival reaches Pete, who's also serving in the army. After the interview, Lou is allowed to have a great meal in the cafeteria. He's enjoying all of this when the broadcasters give him the script for the next session. The script says some bad things about America, and Lou doesn't want to read it. The men tell him that every soldier in that cafeteria is living in luxury because they agreed to say this stuff. But Lou isn't ready to sell his country yet, so he's taken back to the prison camp, where Watanabe is happy to see his punching bag back. He likes Lou's resolve, but his mind is so twisted that he wants to punish Lou for it, so he asks all the soldiers to punch Lou one by one. John doesn't want to do it, but Watanabe starts torturing another soldier. This is when Lou tells him to comply with the order and punch him, so the soldiers start hitting him in the face one by one. He soon loses consciousness and even passes out by the time the last soldier hits him. A few weeks later, it starts snowing, and John and others perform a play, not only for prisoners, but also for the Japanese men. This is when Watanabe tells Lou that he's getting transferred to another camp. Lou is relieved, but he stays calm and says nothing. He watches as Watanabe finally leaves his sight. A few days later, soldiers are spending the night playing cards, remembering their families and thinking about their future. Out of nowhere, the camp gets bombed in an air raid, and the prisoners have to rush to put out the fire. They are happy that the US is winning, but John tells them that if Japan loses, they will execute all the prisoners. The next morning, John announces that they're getting transferred to another prison camp near Tokyo. So Lou and the others march in the cold, and this is when they see the horror created by last night's bombing. They see bodies in the streets and destroyed homes, before boarding a train that takes them through some snowy mountains. They arrive at a coal mine, where Lou almost faints after learning that the man running the mine is none other than Watanabe. He tells them that they'll have to work or they'll get executed, and before dismissing them, he again hits Lou in the head just for fun. The prisoners are then taken to their barracks, where some other soldiers tell them that they'll most likely die in these mines. For the next few weeks, Lou and John work alongside other prisoners in these extremely bad conditions, where they watch prisoners die all the time. Then one day while working, Watanabe gives them the news that President Roosevelt has died, and this sad news brings tears to the eyes of many prisoners who are losing hope. Still, Lou keeps working, but one day while delivering a load, a Japanese guard pushes him and he hurts his leg. He's limping back to his barracks and Watanabe notices this. The next day, while Lu is trying to catch his breath, a soldier drags him to Watanabe, who tells him to pick up a heavy wooden beam. The beam weighs a lot, and Lu can barely stand up, but he manages to pick it up and bring it over his head. Watanabe tells the guard to shoot Lu if he drops the beam. But even as hours go by, Lu still doesn't drop the heavy load. Now everyone at the dock is looking at him, and he looks Watanabe straight in the eye as he pushes the heavy beam all the way up while screaming at Watanabe's face. Watanabe is clearly shocked by Lu's resolve, and in his panic he starts beating Lu. But Lu doesn't even care at this point, and he just thinks and imagines himself going for a run on the beach. He spends that night out in the open, and the next morning he's back to work. But John makes an announcement that the war has ended, and the Japanese soldiers want the prisoners to take a bath in the river. Most of the prisoners think that they're going to be executed now. They slowly make their way to the river, but to their surprise, a US aircraft flies over their heads, signaling that the war is finally over. Just then, the Japanese soldiers drop their weapons, and their prisoners start celebrating. More and more planes fly over their heads and drop all sorts of supplies, including food, magazines, and even chocolate. While most of the soldiers are enjoying this, Lu goes to Watanabe's office, which is empty, but there he finds Watanabe's picture with his dad. A few days later, Lu is back in the US, where he kisses the ground and hugs everyone in his family, who are over the moon to see him. The film ends by showing us that Lu proudly carried the torch of the 1998 Winter Olympics, which took place in Japan, a place where he went through so much pain. If you enjoyed that recap, I got a good feeling that you'll like this one too. Click on the video on your screen for more.